There's several aviators represented here in the building that really step out, and I can't think of really more than 2 or 3 that would be at the same level as Eddie Rickenbacker. Captain Eddie, as he was known to everyone, was an extremely famous man before the first day of the war. Before World War I, he was a champion motorcycle racer at a time when there weren't a lot of motorcycle races. But the world and America knew his name, and they knew him as somebody that was dependable. He was a risk taker, and you could depend on him. That was the main thing, is throughout his life, that was the one characteristic about Captain Eddie that everybody knew, is this was a dependable human. He kind of represented America to a lot of people. He flew several aircraft during the war, but most notably it was the SPAD. He flew the SPAD Model 7, and he also flew the Newport 28. This SPAD was purchased at Sotheby's auction house by a friend of mine, and when he donated the aircraft to the museum, he actually left the Sotheby's auction house paddle inside the seat. So this is an example of one of the aircraft that Captain Eddie flew in combat, and he was very successful with it. He has over 25 victories. He was the #1 American pilot of the war. The aircraft above, we have that Newport 28 marked as one of his mounts. The hat in the ring emblem on there was emblematic of America joining the forces of freedom, joining into the war on what was viewed as the site for freedom, for justice. So that's Captain Eddie's aircraft. And over here we have a display of some of his medals that were given to us by the International Air and Space Hall of Fame, but they came originally from the family. In this case that we have devoted to him, we've got a model of his SPAD, we've got several other items, including a copy of his Medal of Honor certificate, and this wonderful medal grouping that came direct from the family through the Hall of Fame to us. It includes several things that are just phenomenally unique. That's a beautiful Croix de Guerre with 2 of the large gold palms on there. The gold palm on a Croix de Guerre medal means it was presented by the nation of France. It didn't come from a general or his commanding officer, it came from the nation of France. The Medal of Honor that's beside it is from him personally, and when you flip it over it says, "For display purposes only." So we know this isn't one that was intended to be worn around the neck. This is one that was presented at the time of the presentation or investiture. They would give not only the medal around his neck, but they would also give him one for display, and that's the medal we have right there. My favorite part of the display is this tiny emblem of a hat in the ring. And like I previously said, that was the emblem of his squadron, the 94th Aero Squadron. And it's easy to see how important it was to him. That emblem, that little pin in our case, shows up on several of the portraits of him. Right here it's on a portrait, and it's in all of his official photographs. He wore that pin many years after the war, and to see the famous pin off his uniform in our display case, that I think that's a feather in our cap. There's two things in this case that aren't from World War I. He continued to serve. He was a voice of reason and just a deeply respected leader in America into World War II. One of the things that he did was he prepared this book. This book right here, When a Man Faces Death, was an essay he wrote to explain to our young sailors and Marines the cost of winning an invasion, of any war. It's a book that explains to our young men, to our actual war fighters, that the chances are very good they're not going to come home. And it explains to them the thought process of how to prepare for that. When you're talking about troop ships full of 17, 18, and 19-year-old kids, these young men most of them had never even kissed a girl before. And they were being sent to face German machine guns or Japanese artillery. So this little book right here, this very small book, was a guidebook for a generation of soldiers that had to go do their duty. It wasn't a choice for them. So it's one of the few artifacts in the building that always stops me in my tracks. It's very powerful. The book in the back tells the story of during World War II when Captain Eddie's transport plane crashed in the Pacific Ocean. And it's at a time in the war when there weren't many aircraft, there weren't search aircraft in the area. And he ended up in a life raft with the survivors for several weeks. They had no food, they had almost no water, and all of the survivors in the life raft credited Captain Eddie's guidance, his leadership, and that stable nature of his. They all credited their survival with that. There's a famous story that's attributed to him that very late in life, when he passed the age of being recognized, he was just now an old man on the beach. He would go down to the pier in California and he would feed the seagulls. And people would point out to him that, hey, we don't feed the seagulls. And it was his tribute going back to those days in the life raft, because at one point he managed to capture a seagull, and that bird provided enough nutrition to keep the 7 men inside that life raft alive for a few more days until they were rescued. So it's a very powerful book about a very powerful man, and I appreciate that our museum does an excellent job of presenting him and his career. That's Captain Eddie Rickenbacker.